No bills have been introduced. The House comes to question for oral answer question number 1 in the name of Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with the Prime Minister with regard to achieving a budget surplus that, quote, if we had to take $300 million out of the health budget or something to achieve that, I think most people would think that's a bit silly, end quote. If so, why did he reduce the new operating spending allowance by $500 million for 2015-16 after the Treasury forecast a deficit for that year?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, I agree with the Prime Minister. In regards to the second part of the question, the member is simply wrong. We didn't reduce the allowance for, quote, new spending at all. What we did say is we allowed an average of $1.5 million across 3 years for both spending and tax reductions. And in the light of the forecasts, we moved the $500 million in the first 2 years into the third year. This is all simply a government accounting. What we know the member is going to try and do is say there's $500 million of cuts, because that's what he's been saying since he was a student protest leader, and his economics hasn't changed since then.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
So to clarify, is it correct that he increased the spending allowance for budgets 2015 and 2016 by $500 million in an election year budget and then cut them again by $500 million just a couple of months after the election?
Speaker,
Honourable Bill English.
No, that's not correct. As I explained before, the government allowed $1.5 billion over the next 3 years on average. That was all quite transparent in the election campaign, and we always said it was for spending and tax cuts and reductions in ACC levies. And we have simply this year used $1 billion that we specified for spending and pushed the $500 million for moderate tax reductions into 2017. It does affect the surplus numbers, as the member has pointed out.
Your question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Isn't this, as he's just described it, exactly the kind of fiddling around with the books that has led New Zealand businesses and workers to be overcharged by hundreds of millions of dollars for ACC in search of a budget surplus that he has now pushed out to the never, never?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, and the member is giving a misleading impression that it's the government's books. The government's books are absolutely transparent. The spending allowance is simply a construction that we use to discipline our spending. It's not government accounting. But it brings me back to the heart of this issue is Labor always wants to spend more, regardless of whether it works, regardless of whether it changes anything, and they can't stand it when they think someone might be being careful with the spending.
That's right. Question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How is it responsible to be manipulating the books or using a construction, for his words, to offer the prospect of tax cuts in an election year in 2017 when over successive budgets he has failed to meet needs in core areas like health and education? How's that responsible, Minister?
Oh, well, the member
Honourable Bill
right.
English.
The output, the impact of our health and education systems on New Zealanders is better than ever.
That's right.
More of pretty much everything that New Zealanders need, despite the fact that money's been pretty tight. A lot more children, a lot more, for instance, Māori and Pacific students achieving NCA level 2. Māori immunisation rates are now almost as high as the general population, when for 30 years they lagged by a long way. And actually it's the key to this government's management is better public services, even if we are a bit tighter with the money.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
With our exports dropping, a failure to diversify beyond commodities leaving a $7 billion hole in the economy, the Christchurch earthquake rebuild peaking, can he give New Zealanders today just one new idea that he has to grow the economy, or is he just plain tired and out of ideas?
Well, Mr. Speaker,
Bill
the great
English.
thing is we have a country where there's thousands of people with thousands of new ideas about developing the economy, and it's my job and the government's job to support them. Labor's view is the country should wait round for Grant Robertson's new idea. And apparently his new idea is work. Labor have discovered work. It's just that they're against all the policies that create work.
Question number 2. Order. Order.